quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War. This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Friday, April 11th, 2025, the 82nd day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. What a week we've had. So many things going on. And today actually feels oddly quiet. I know with the television news cycle and with people's constant focus on the news, it can feel like a zillion things are going on. But today's one of those days where it does not feel like a zillion things are going on. We are going to talk about immigration. We're going to talk about identification. We're going to talk about our rigged and stolen elections. We're going to talk about China. And who knows, we might even talk about Mike Johnson's big, beautiful package and how there's not going to be enough money in the future for the science. And I think that that will get us through a good chunk of hopefully signal, hopefully not much noise, unless it's funny noise. Funny noise is always well worth it. We have to make room for the funny noise, and we have to allow for the funny noise. We cannot just be serious all the time. But let's be serious for a while and see how it goes. Maybe we'll laugh. We'll probably laugh. This is the Washington Post from just yesterday. Judge allows requirement that everyone in the U.S. illegally must register to move forward. And I always think that these articles are funny. For the same reason that I used to think illegal aliens getting voter IDs, or not voter IDs, sorry, driver's licenses was funny. And I remember when that was a thing. I feel like that was, I don't know, 15 years plus at this point, maybe 20 years ago. But I distinctly remember talking about this in Los Angeles because, of course, California was always ahead of the curve when it came to things that would subvert the United States of America as a free and sovereign nation. And the only thing I could think when I started thinking about that issue is, well, why don't we just drive buses to the DMV, and when illegal aliens come in to get driver's licenses, instead just put them on the bus and deport them? I thought that seemed totally obvious, but I guess that was not meant to be. So what can you say? I guess it's just a thing now. But let's get into this article. A federal judge on Thursday allowed the Trump administration to move forward with a requirement that everyone in the U.S. illegally must register with the federal government and carry documentation in a move that could have far-reaching repercussions for immigrants across the country. Judge Trevor Neal McFadden, a Trump appointee, sided with the administration, which had argued that officials were simply enforcing a requirement that already existed for everyone who is in the country but isn't an American. McFadden's ruling didn't go into the substance of the arguments, but rested largely on the technical issue of whether the groups pushing to stop the requirement had standing to pursue their claims, and he ruled that they didn't. Immediately after, the DHS emphasized in a news release that the deadline to register for those who've already been in the country for 30 days or more is Friday. That's today. And that going forward, the registration requirement would be enforced. Kristi Noem said, President Trump and I have a clear message for those in our country illegally. Leave now. If you leave now, you may have the opportunity to return and enjoy our freedom and live the American dream. The Trump administration will enforce all our immigration laws. We will not pick and choose which laws we will enforce. We must know who is in our country for the safety and security of our homeland and all Americans. Okay, so I want to hit just a few segments of this. So we're going to skip ahead. One of the groups that sued the National Immigration Law Center called the Thursday ruling disappointing. This disappointing ruling unfortunately means that, for now, Trump's scheme to force people into an impossible choice moves forward. As we weigh next steps in our case, we urge affected community members to consult with an immigration attorney to better understand the consequences of registering or not. This is the deputy legal director at the National Immigration Law Center. So what is the impossible choice? Register with the government and let them know where you are, or leave? I don't get it. I really don't get it. The National Immigration Law Center is clearly just trying to keep people here who should be deported. It seems like a blatant admission of that. Homeland Security officials announced February 25th that it was mandating all people in the United States illegally register with the federal government. It wouldn't make sense for them to illegally register, although they're probably going to do that. And said those who didn't self-report could face fines or prosecution. Failure to register is considered a crime, and the people will be required to carry registration documents with them or risk prison time. Registration will be mandatory for everyone 14 and older without legal status. And skipping down once again, federal immigration law has long required that people who aren't American citizens and live in the U.S., including those here illegally, register with the government. Those laws can be traced back to the Alien Registration Act of 1940, which came amid growing fears of immigrants and political subversives in the days of World War II. The current requirements stem from the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, but the requirement that people illegally in the U.S. register has been enforced only in rare circumstances. In fact, advocates opposing the government say it hasn't been universally used since it was first introduced in the mid-1940s. So on all sides, it's admitted and understood that these laws have been on the books. Donald Trump is president of the United States, and everyone who works for him who's required to give an oath, the oath they give is to uphold the laws of the United States of America. As president, if the laws are put in place and those laws are constitutional, the president has a duty to follow the laws. That's kind of just how the system works. But they never have before. So if he tries to, then we get lawsuits. They argue that the registry puts people who work, contribute to the economy, and have deep family ties in America into a deep bind. Do they come forward, register, and essentially give up their location to a government intent on carrying out mass deportations, or do they stay in the shadows and risk being charged with the crime of not registering? The government has already asked people subject to the registration requirement to create an account on the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services website. And from the Trump cabinet meeting press conference TV episode yesterday, they were actually talking about, sorry, let me pull that back up just for 1 second here. The CBP One app that we heard about, that was what was facilitating the entry in the global slave trade for all of these millions of illegal aliens who came in during the fake and illegitimate Biden administration, or so we are told. This app is now going to be used to make their exit, to facilitate their exit more efficiently. Interesting how these things turn back around. It really is. So they're going to have to register. We're going to have to know how many illegal aliens are here. Them registering would be a good way to know once and for all. I mean, not that we're going to get an accurate registry. I'm just saying theoretically, in a perfect world, them being forced to register or getting deported, if they were registered, and if companies had to, for instance, check immigration status and documentation in order to have these workers, then we would know how many are here. And I have strong doubts that it's only 11 million. And sometimes we hear figures up to 30 million, but it could be a lot more than that. And of course, Brian and I actually on Badlands Daily this morning had a bit of this discussion, but we're finding out through this Doge process that there are potentially a lot of fake people in the country that are parts. They are essentially, they exist as data entries in the Social Security Administration or voter registries or whatever other database we have. There are just made up people who haven't been born yet. That's a real interesting one. People who are 150 years old. We've seen it run the gamut. And so, of course, it would be no surprise if our ridiculous population number of, now they say 340 million people, had millions or tens of millions of non-existent people on it. I think there's also probably tens of millions of illegal aliens on there, or people who should not be here legally, especially once birthright citizenship goes away. And I always marvel at the idea that we could have 250 million people here in the 90s and have decreasing birth rates over these last few decades, people waiting longer to have children, fewer people having children, people having fewer children, and still end up with a population that over 30 years has increased by 40% almost. Seems crazy to me, seems impossible to me. It's like there's something else going on here. Let's continue. What else do we need ID for? Well, let's get the news on yesterday's passage of the SAVE Act out of the fake and illegitimate House of Representatives. And we're going to get the news from Mark Elias's own Democracy Docket. Mark Elias, the election lawfare attorney of the uniparty left. And maybe one day we'll find out that there are election lawfare attorneys on the uniparty right playing the Washington Generals to the Mark Elias Harlem Globetrotters. And hopefully we will find these things out, because the election system has been allowed to remain in place for years, for decades, while our elections have been fake, and there hasn't been a lot done about it. But let's move past that. SAVE Act, House passes GOP voting bill that could disenfranchise millions. Okay? We're supposed to believe that millions of otherwise real, lawful American voters are going to be unable to vote in elections going forward because of this bill. That, by the way, probably won't get signed into law. Very low likelihood it's going to get through the Senate. The House of Representatives voted Thursday. What in the world just happened? There we go. The people on audio are not going to understand that at all. But for all of you watching, you know that my screen just disappeared. We're back now. The U.S. House of Representatives voted Thursday to pass the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, a major voter suppression measure that, if it became law, could disenfranchise millions of eligible voters and badly undermine U.S. democracy. Once again, Our democracy is at stake. The SAVE Act would make it more difficult for active voters to continue participating in elections. And they want to be sure you know that it's both sides of the uniparty, Republicans and Democrats alike, are both going to be affected by this. And it would erect unprecedented barriers for new voters hoping to register and participate. Okay, so the barriers are unprecedented, but are they insurmountable, or are they just reasonable barriers? And are they actually barriers in the future? The bill appears to face long odds in the Senate, where it would need 60 votes to overcome an expected Democrat filibuster. Friar Cuck, Jamie Raskin, went off. It's hard to call him Friar Cuck now because he's not bald anymore. He got extra hair added. And hey, man, you stay young, Jamie Raskin. It's just harder to pull that off after you've been Friar Cuck. In a bold new departure for the forces of voter suppression, MAGA's so-called SAVE Act will make it harder for tens of millions of eligible Americans to vote, including tens of millions of people, mostly women, who changed their names after marriage. And we actually had the issue, I think it was called Maidengate in 2020, where there would be, I think it was that there were multiple ballots basically in the maiden name and the married name. I don't remember the exact details of that. I'll look another time. It's not important. Every eligible voter, he says, should be able to access the ballot box free from legislated intimidation, trickery, and harassment. Republicans have pursued the SAVE Act under the guise of preventing non-citizens from voting, which they portray as an existential threat to the American electoral system. In fact, illegal voting by non-citizens and fraud in general is extremely rare. This, according to election lawfare attorney Mark Elias's democracy docket. Now, every time we talk about this issue, and we're going to talk about it broadly today, so it's, I think, important to lay these reminders in there. The claim is presented to the general public as illegal aliens somehow accidentally registering to vote and then going down to a polling place and casting their vote, or requesting a mail-in ballot, voting, and sending that mail-in ballot back in. That is not my concern at all. My concern is that the illegal aliens being added to voter registries when they get their driver's licenses provides this huge bank of names and identities that can be voted, and no one will ever know that the votes came from illegal aliens. It will be impossible to prove that because there's no record. Because the mail-in ballot envelopes, for instance, get separated from the ballots, so you can't trace them and connect them. There are all sorts of those little complications which create loopholes in the system and allow for things like this to happen. So what I suspect is happening, as I've said too many times to count, is that someone else is preparing ballots for these names to the extent they need those ballots to be able to substantiate the reported outcomes and results if they're ever checked. And that can be done without the participation of the illegal alien at all. So it's not the claim that illegal aliens are voting. It's the claim that illegal aliens are definitely registered to vote, and votes can, and most definitely are, cast in their names. So the idea is preventing that. One day, in person, hand marked, hand counted, paper ballots. And we're going to talk a lot about the ID thing. The ID thing is a tough one, but maybe it's the only way. And of course, they want to let you know at the ACLU that there's no way that this could be about elections. What they want to do is pick and choose their voters. They want to make sure that brown people and black people and old people and rural people, whatever, are not allowed to vote anymore because that is said to help Republicans somehow. And as long as we cling to the uniparty right and left Democrat and Republican paradigm, they get to portray this as somehow a thing that those nasty Republicans are doing to always win elections over Democrats, which allows them to skirt the recognition that the American people actually want these things. Among its changes, the bill would require everyone registering to vote or updating their registration information to present documentary proof of citizenship in person. Recent studies have shown that millions of eligible voters lack easy access to documents that prove their citizenship, like a passport, birth certificate, or naturalization papers. As many as 21.3 million U.S. citizens, more than 9% of voters, quote unquote. And what they're saying there is more than 9% of the people registered to vote, which is not actually the number of voters. It's so crazy. It really is so crazy. And I don't mean to go off on another tangent, but if in 2016, we have about 131 million voters, supposedly, in terms of the total votes cast in the 2020 general election, as reported. And then in 2020, we have 158 million. It goes up by 27 million in one cycle. Give me a break. So 131 million voters. Why aren't they just using those numbers? It would make it sound like them. But let's continue. The law would disproportionately affect voters of color, women with the last name, rural voters with disabilities. They can't access the systems that would get these IDs. In addition to the citizenship requirement, the SAVE Act threatens election workers with up to 5 years in prison or civil lawsuits if they register someone without the correct documents, even if that person is a citizen. Oh no, that sounds like actual election integrity and accountability on the back end. And the bill aims to restrict mail voting by barring states from counting mail ballots that arrive after Election Day, as many states do. And so this bill, this SAVE Act, is being referred to as codifying Donald Trump's election integrity order. We read last week in that lawsuit from the attorneys general at, who are communists in the commie states, or at least the more obviously commie states. They were contesting Trump's executive order. And some of the grounds on which they were contesting the order are at least worthwhile arguments, like, does the president have power to do this? The elections are supposed to be run by the states. And that would be great if the elections were solely run by the states, but there have already been these federal problems introduced into the state systems, and the states act in correspondence with those federal demands. They just don't want to act in correspondence with Trump's federal demands. Go ahead and knock down the whole federal government influence into elections. Sounds good. So let's move on from this. Let's just go quickly to USA Today and their coverage of this yesterday. They, I got to find this paragraph. Sometimes the highlights work. Sometimes the highlights don't work, but I know what I am looking for. There we are. What is the SAVE Act? It was first introduced in 2024, failed to pass the Senate at that time, and was reintroduced again last month. And so this is Chip Roy and Mike Lee, two quote unquote conservatives who were very vocal on Twitter, very based, very red pilled. In fact, Mike Lee has the based Mike Lee Twitter account. Now, are they good guys? Maybe. Chip Roy does not seem like a good guy. Chip Roy did not object, if memory serves. And, I always hate trying to recall these things. I'm so concerned about being incorrect. I would never want to give you bad information. So let me just look quickly to make sure. I believe that Chip Roy failed to object to the electors in the stolen election of 2020. which I find reprehensible. And then he went ahead and supported Ron DeSantis in the fake primaries, which I also find despicable. Let's just move on from Chip Roy. I'm not finding the, hold on. Actually, I know. I'll just ask the machine. Did Chip Roy object to the certification of electors in 2020? No, Chip Roy did not object. Okay, so there we go. So we got Chip Roy and Mike Lee bringing this thing up. Chip Roy doesn't even object to the certification of Joe Biden's electors, but he is going to be the guy that fixes elections. Does this fix elections? I don't know. It seeks to amend the National Voter Registration Act of 1993 and require Americans seeking to register or re-register to vote to present a real ID compliant ID proving U.S. citizenship. A real ID compliant ID. The typical driver's license or government issued photo ID cards that don't show birthplace or citizenship on them would need to be presented along with a birth certificate, a naturalization certificate, or adoption decree. Other acceptable forms of real ID include a valid U.S. passport, valid military ID, and forms of tribal identification. It would not allow proof of name change or a marriage certificate as acceptable proof of identity, impacting anyone with birth certificates that don't match their legal names. So real ID. And real ID to vote. I'm not making an argument. The argument might be in favor of real ID in this instance. It is not an overall argument in favor of real ID. I am open to the arguments on both sides of that issue. I see the privacy concerns, and also I'm not sure that the privacy concerns they're definitely valid. But if we have a phone in our pockets and we have a bunch of forms of ID and we're online consistently and we're typing things into our phones and we're typing things into search engines and our little cameras are watching us and they're tracking our biometrics, and the same databases and algorithms that analyze all of that stuff also have access to our location data and to our spending data, then to say carrying around a national ID is going too far based on privacy concerns, I mean, that seems pointless. And I don't mean to sound defeatist on it. And again, I'm open to the argument, but we've already given it all away. And we give it away continually. And it's bad that the government tracks that stuff. Maybe there's some way that we can secure our data better in the future. That would be by eliminating the middlemen that are able to compile all this data and then feed it through algorithms and access all that data. And hopefully we'll be in a more secure situation as things decentralize and fragment. That's what I hope for the future. I don't know that's what we're going to get, but I think it probably is. I think there's a chance we get something along those lines, and I do hope for that. So Kristi Noem in that cabinet meeting yesterday mentioned real ID. And before we get to that, it's important to see what else Kristi Noem did this week. She's been influencing like crazy.
Here we are with Marco and Brian today. They're letting me roll with them. We're going to go out and pick up somebody who I think is got charges of human trafficking. We earlier had an op that swept up somebody who was wanted for murder. So appreciate the good work that they do every day, and we appreciate them working to make America safe.
That is some serious Instagram influencing done by a serious Instagram influencer, all dressed up, out there just kicking ass and collecting illegal aliens with her weapons of war. I mean, I honestly, people are happy about this because something's being done, or at least we're being shown footage that something is being done in pictures. But all of this is ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. Kristi Noem dodges kicks from migrant suspect as she leads ICE deportation raids in Phoenix. This according to the New York Post. How about that? Making sure the gun's all set up properly for the photo shoot. Arresting this guy. Mask. What's up with that? This guy's got a face. This guy's got this shoe laying back in the car. Maybe he doesn't want his picture taken. I don't know what is happening here. And maybe she's just talking into the car window, checking out this here illegal alien suspect. And there's Corey Lewandowski also doing a ride along with Kristi Noem. Now you have the real serious red imagery. Makes it look like a Nicholas Winding Refn film. And or TV show, what was the Nicholas Winding Refn TV show? I can't remember it. It was called, here we go, give it to me, machine. Too Old to Die Young. That's what that picture looks like, very much. And if you've ever seen that show, you'll be like, yeah, it do be like that, though. And there we have it. Just kick-ass Instagram influencing all over the place, rounding up illegal aliens and taking some photos. Get that lady a makeup line endorsement, or just have her open her own. She could be the next Kardashian. She could be a MAGA Kardashian. That's what we need. More Kardashians. So here is Kristi Noem yesterday in the cabinet meeting.
I think American people need to know that Real ID will be required to travel on May 7th. So those governors have been notified to communicate that at home. We don't want anybody to get delayed and not be able to travel when they get to an airport. And this will also help us bring integrity back to all of our IDs and how they're used for issuing driver's licenses. And governors know how I feel about making sure their driver's licensing system has integrity, because a lot of people use their driver's license to vote. And the backbone of our country and the foundation is election integrity. So we're giving all those directions to our governors and communicating that so they can lead on it as well.
And we're going to work with people so that if they go.
So we're going to have Real ID, and you're going to need Real ID to fly in 4 weeks. Do you have a Real ID? A lot of people do. I think I do, actually. But now it's going to be a requirement to be able to board planes. And maybe you can take a passport or take a TSA pre-check card or something like that. I'm not sure how that works. But that is a forcing function to get people to procure a Real ID. Now, is it going to be hard for some people to get a Real ID if they're citizens and live here? Kind of doubt it. I mean, maybe it's inconvenient to have to go down to the DMV. Nobody wants to go to the DMV. I'm not even sure if you have to handle that stuff. I guess you have to handle the ID part of it in person, but maybe they've streamlined the process since last I did it. But that's a forcing function. Everybody's going to have one, or you're not going to be able to travel by May 7th of this year. So 4 weeks from now. Now, they've had these deadlines in the past, and the Real ID thing, I started looking into it yesterday after hearing this announcement, because I know that there's been considerable pushback over the years to the Real ID program. And so it comes from all sides. This is from the American Enterprise Institute, which is a neocon think tank. Totally GOP establishment and elite. These are not MAGA people. They're certainly not the sorts of people that are interested in sovereignty issues, let's say. So this is from December of 2022, and I just want to cover this part here. Real ID was not a recommendation of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, known as the 9/11 Commission. The commission dedicated 3/4 of a page to the question of identity security out of more than 400 substantive pages. The Real ID Act repealed the provisions in the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 that Congress had passed responsive to the 9/11 Commission's thinking. The passage of the Real ID Act canceled a negotiated rulemaking process that was enlisting input from state motor vehicle administrators, privacy advocates, and others. Some deny it, but Real ID is emphatically a national ID. It is national in scope, knitting together diverse state systems into a system uniform with respect to its data elements and behind-the-scenes information sharing. It is used for identification, and it is practically required as driving legally is conditioned on having a state-issued document. Yes, some states make it more or less easy to carry a non-federal ID or license consistent with the statute, but the statute aims to get the bulk of Americans into the system and requires sharing all drivers' data. Then there is the question of whether you need a Real ID to fly. The terms of the law are clear that the federal government may not accept licenses from states not complying with Real ID beginning 3 years after the enactment of the statute. But the statute also allows the DHS to delay implementation in the face of adequate justification. And Kristi Noem, DHS, doesn't sound like they're working in that direction, but who knows? Things can change at a moment's notice. It could change the day before for all we know. And the author opines, the justifications, they have been adequate. Thus, the May 11th, 2008 deadline for Real ID compliance, which would soon mean Real IDs in everyone's hands, has changed again and again and again. He's talking about a book he wrote. The story I told in a piece he wrote in 2014 was reiterated. The last iteration of the Real ID implementation is the new deadline change announced by DHS on December 5th, 2022. Off the deadline goes to May 7th, 2025, 20 years post-passage, almost to the day. So that's what's coming up in 4 weeks. DHS has futzed relentlessly with the meaning of compliance, but trying to enforce Real ID at the current low level of compliance would invite stern inquiries from Congress because it would disrupt Americans' business and vacation travel. And nobody wants that except perhaps for the obscure advocacy organization run by the fellow who wrote the Real ID statute as a congressional staffer. Now, again, that's an opinion piece, but it lays out some of the concerns about privacy and the difficulty they had in implementing it. He said, this is never going to happen. That's what the headline is. This thing keeps getting delayed. You're never going to have to worry about Real ID because it's just never going to happen. Seems like it's going to happen. This is the ACLU. So we're going from regime, now neocons and the ACLU have been presented to us always as like two opposite ends of the spectrum, but they are both well within the uniparty paradigm. So they're both servants of the regime. So I don't actually understand them even as importantly different, much less at true opposite ends of the spectrum. But this is what the ACLU had to say. The Real ID Act of 2005 requires states to standardize driver's licenses across the nation into a single national identity card and database. While it is ostensibly aimed at improving driver's license security, its actual effect is to turn those same licenses into national ID cards by stipulating that state driver's licenses and state ID cards will not be accepted for federal purposes, including boarding an aircraft or entering a federal facility, unless they meet all of the law's numerous conditions. This is, it's hard not to see it as government overreach and agree with the ACLU here. If fully implemented, the law would facilitate the tracking of data on individuals and bring government into the very center of every citizen's life. By definitively turning driver's licenses into a form of national identity documents, Real ID would have a tremendously destructive impact on privacy. It would also impose significant administrative burdens and expenses on state governments, and it would mean higher fees, longer lines, repeat visits to the DMV, and bureaucratic nightmares for individuals. Because of these problems, many states oppose the use of Real ID, and it has not gone into full effect. The ACLU has joined with these states to support the repeal of the law. So what's going to happen along those lines? It's a good question. California does the Real ID thing. Texas, I believe, I saw someone commenting today in the Badlands Daily chat, does the Real ID stuff. So those are two populous states. I think Brian was saying that he has it down in Florida. So those are three very populous states. So the barriers to being able to do it, the practical concerns, I think, are probably a little blown out of proportion there. The privacy concerns may not be, but then again, we're giving it all away. We're already giving it all away. Now, from a regime perspective, something like this would essentially operate as a voter ID. And while it's doing that, and I think that this is the key part, and this is maybe one of the things that has them so upset about the SAVE Act as well. And they're always going to try to find another route to explaining what the true intent of their opposition or support is. But if you have to get a Real ID in order to travel, in order to vote, etc., and you have to have proof of citizenship to be able to get a Real ID in various forms, and it's very hard to fake that verification process. And there are penalties for anybody who tries to sidestep that verification process. Well, do you really need voter registries? If you had proof of where you lived, they have record, they have a record of your address in the States. I don't know how it was for all of you, but when I used to go vote, there would just be my name and address in a book on a sheet of paper, and I would sign, yes, that's me. And then I would go do my hand-marked paper ballot. Do we need voter registry and voter registrations if we have Real ID? And if we don't, and I don't think that we would, then A, why is Scott Pressler focused all the time on compiling voter registrations? And B, that's kind of good as far as I'm concerned when it comes to elections. If we're going to have elections into the future, we need to have real elections. I don't know that we're definitely going to have elections, and maybe there are other ways that are hard for us to wrap our heads around because we've always believed that elections are our one chance to represent what we think to the government. So I don't know if we'll have elections in the future, but assuming we do, they have to be real. And voter registries, voter registration databases are bloated. Everybody knows they're bloated. They're also the raw materials for election fraud. And so if we're going to have voter registration databases at all, if people have to register to vote, then the voter registries in all the states, in my view, must be purged completely from zero, and everyone has to go register to vote again. And if that means that they need to delay elections, delay elections. I don't think you'd have to delay any important ones. It shouldn't take that long for people to be able to go and register to vote if they care about voting. And I know that that's a little difficult for people who are medically confined or too old to go do that, but still want to. I know that there would probably be some problems along the way, and we can hopefully attempt to figure out ways to alleviate that. But no matter what, you got to get rid of these voter registrations, these databases, because they are so bloated. And there are so many ineligible voters and dead voters and voters who have moved. And the fact that they're telling us that dead people don't vote and illegal aliens don't vote, well, that's proof that the voter registries are being used and abused in the ways we were describing earlier. So you got to get rid of all the names in there, and maybe requiring a Real ID in effect accomplishes that purpose. if you don't need the voter registrations anymore, if you can just show a real ID and that's your voter ID, and that means you're definitely a citizen, maybe that problem is solved. Now, solving that problem is not enough to make our elections real and legitimate, that alone, but that's a nice step. That's one of the things that definitely would have to be done. So I don't know, man. That's a tough one. And I know that probably a lot of you who are concerned about privacy issues will not be thrilled about that argument. And I get it. I'm not thrilled about it either. I'm just wondering, how do we fix some of these problems if we are attached to having elections? A couple Rumble rants in the chat. We'll just pause for a second here. Karamaga, $5, 40 million. And I think that I have to assume that she is giving an estimation of the number of illegal aliens in the country. I would suspect that's what she's talking about. And Polymathanon, $10, says APL is always a funny break. It's true. It's a real palate cleanse as we switch subjects. Also, my pal Ghost of Base Patrick Henry sent me this video from Trump in the Oval Office.
I mean, as long as you're reasonable. You have to be reasonable. We have to be reasonable. Thank you very much.
I don't know. He could be talking about anything. I don't know what that meeting was, but I like it. And I'm glad he highlighted that for me. Unexpected gurgle in the chat says, damn it, I just got that out of my head. Well, sorry. Or you're welcome. All right. So we talked a little bit the other day about the presidential action against Chris Krebs, wanting him to be investigated, removing his security clearances, removing the security clearances of anyone who was a colleague of Chris Krebs at Sentinel-1. And that was kind of going on just as I was starting the show on Wednesday. In addition, there were two other presidential actions taken in addition to that one that I want to discuss as part of a whole. And we'll continue talking about some of the election integrity stuff to the extent that we have any chance of gaining that somehow. Cinco64 says, if he says, I'm your moderator, then you have something. Maybe someday. That would be hilarious. I don't know if we're going to get one of those. Okay, so let's go to the New York Times. From Wednesday, Trump signs orders punishing those who opposed his 2020 election lies. Oh, we're still doing that. No evidence, baseless claims. So as I said, Chris Krebs, but Trump also went after Miles Taylor and the law firm of Sussman Godfrey. Miles Taylor. Now, by the way, Sussman Godfrey, they mentioned right here, was the lawsuit representing Dominion voting systems in the Fox News and Dominion case, which I believe was a friendly lawsuit and a friendly settlement agreed to make it look like Dominion voting systems had done absolutely nothing wrong. But Fox News played a major role in the stolen election of 2020, just as Dominion did. And they both had a considerable interest in confirming through the reporting of the settlement of that case that Dominion had done nothing wrong, and therefore Joe Biden was just as real and legitimate a president as we've always been told. So the order on Taylor, the order punishing Mr. Taylor accused him without evidence of illegally publishing classified conversations in a book he wrote after his opinion article in the Times, adding that this conduct could be properly characterized as treasonous and possibly violating the Espionage Act. Mr. Taylor said in response, "Dissent isn't unlawful. It certainly isn't treasonous. America is headed down a dark path. Never has a man so inelegantly proved another man's point." Miles Taylor is kind of a twerp. You got to love how they say without evidence. It's the same way that Trump's election lies are not founded on any evidence. There's just nothing to the claim that Joe Biden did not receive 81 million real lawful American votes. Of course he did. And if you don't believe that, you ain't black. This is the fact sheet on the Miles Taylor order. So, suspending security clearance by Miles Taylor, suspending the security clearance by individuals and entities associated with Taylor, including the University of Pennsylvania, and a review of Taylor's activities as a government employee. So very similar to the Krebs order, tailored for Taylor. I wonder if this makes Trump sad, the University of Pennsylvania thing, because he went to Wharton, that's Penn's business school. And Penn also has such a close relationship with the one and only Joe Biden. The order says, or the fact sheet, says, President Trump is committed to ending the weaponization of government and believes that those who engage in such conduct should not have access to our nation's secrets. Taylor is a bad faith actor who weaponized and abused his government position, prioritizing his own ambition, personal notoriety, and monetary gain over fidelity to his constitutional oath. While serving, that's pretty direct, by the way. The president is accusing him of treason, and his argument is, it's just dissent. I guess we'll see. It's either dissent or it's espionage. And thank goodness they taught the country about the Espionage Act through the Jack Smith fake indictment on the Mar-a-Lago documents hoax. Continuing. While serving as an administrative staff assistant at the Department of Homeland Security, Taylor stoked dissension by manufacturing sensationalist reports on the existence of a supposed resistance within the federal government that vowed to undermine and render effective. I think that's probably render ineffective a sitting president. Now that is very interesting. And you can kind of see the shape that resistance took after the first Trump term over the past few years. Miles Taylor was part of various efforts getting quote unquote conservatives to sign on to letters in support of a third party. There was an effort to support a third party so that Donald Trump could be taken on from the right or from a more independent organization than the Republican Party was believed to be. Continuing, Taylor published a book under the pseudonym Anonymous, full of falsehoods and fabricated stories. He disclosed sensitive information obtained through unauthorized methods and betrayed the confidence of those with whom he served. Taylor relied upon various colleagues to facilitate his unethical laundering and release of sensitive government data to advance his false narratives. Now, let's have a look at some Morning Joe business, because Morning Joe did not take it very well.
To then order the Justice Department to go after your political enemies. And it gets lost because people are worried about the stock market, thinking about the tariff debate that we spent the first half of the show talking about. Remember, this isn't isolated either. The day that the president did the tariffs, Laura Loomer went into the White House and convinced the president to fire some of the most accomplished people on the National Security Council. And that didn't get that much coverage. And yet you're talking about people with like vast expertise in cybersecurity, which is arguably the biggest vulnerability as a country that we have, that requires extreme expertise. And so those two things just show like that he continues to go after people that he considers his political enemies just because they don't share his ideology, putting that on top of a competence and just the type of people you need in government. It's very hard to get the American people to pay attention to it because there's so much that's being hit with them. But it's good that you guys did the segment. It's good that people are paying attention to it because you're setting a precedent that you hope others won't follow, but others could, and it has real ramifications.
David, thinking about Krebs and Taylor, but Krebs in particular, his criticisms, if you can even call them criticisms, they were just presentation of facts, were neither political nor personal about Donald Trump. He just came out and said, my job was to look at the security of the elections in 2020. They were secure. There was not widespread fraud. The voting machines were not tampered with. So what would be theoretically the charge here from the Justice Department?
I don't know. And the point could be simply the criminal investigation and intimidating people who oppose the president. And I just want to back up on what Julia was talking about earlier. This is all about the concentration of power, incredible power in the presidency. Are the courts going to challenge the president and he's deporting these people on his own? Will Congress, counter the president as he takes these sweeping actions? Again, it's a basic principle of American democracy. As a journalist, I want three strong branches of governments that compete with each other. I want transparency. I want them all to leak to me. But that is what we are seeing here, is unprecedented concentration of power in the president, and Trump is using it.
And even if there isn't being a charge, it's legal fees, it's bogging down, it's intimidation. When people warned, Joe, when President Trump, when he took office and promised this campaign of retribution, this is exactly what they were warning about, whether it be people who used to work for him, political foes, journalists, activists, whatever it might be. We're seeing it play out right here.
So when the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, and anyone who could be deemed to be some way involved with the very violent insurrection, anyone who pursued claims of election fraud, etc., whenever any of those people were being investigated, that was necessary because they were all criminals. And we knew that because news reports from the mainstream media continued telling us they were criminals. That was all justified and necessary in order to maintain the rule of law in this country and make sure that we don't have two systems of justice, a two-tiered system of justice. But now the investigations are just for intimidation's sake, so that Trump can coalesce power, bringing it all to himself inside the executive branch. That's what they would have us believe. Well, that's bonkers. Is his power constitutional? Yes. So that power's already vested in the president. He's just choosing to use it in ways they don't like. And so they have to make it sound like Donald Trump, the man, the only politician in the country with an obvious and overwhelming mandate. That's the guy staging the coup against our democracy. It's mind-blowing. But hey, what do you expect from these people? Let's check out Rachel Maddow. It seems like they're just a little bit worried about the whole Krebs thing. And, they were referencing their Timothy Hoff from Cybercom and the NSA. And we're being told this is a threat to our national security because these people were such experts. And you know how complicated cybersecurity is. And I'm sure, by the way, it's very complicated. But it doesn't mean that there's only one guy that can do it. And we had the absolute best, most loyal, most faithful servant of the United States of America that anyone has ever seen. And Trump went ahead and got rid of that guy and replaced him with Chuck from down at the donut shop. What are these people ever talking about? Everything Trump does is the most dangerous thing. Hey, you know what's dangerous? Telling the country that Joe Biden received 81 million real lawful American votes, and all of the people embedded in the national security infrastructure and the DHS infrastructure actually agree with that statement. And they're the experts, and we have to trust them. And anything that conflicts with their claims Those are baseless claims with no evidence. The experts, they have the evidence. That's why they're saying these things. And we don't get to see their evidence, of course, because that's proprietary national security information. So for whatever reason, they're really worried about this stuff. Here is everyone's favorite, Rachel Maddow.
Going to be the response. If we've still got the antibodies to defend ourselves as a democracy, if our civil society is still working, if our legal profession is still on the job, what we ought to see here in response to this, in response to what will be not just these two guys being targeted, it'll be a dozen, it'll be 100, it'll be 1,000 of these if Trump likes how this one goes and he isn't stopped from doing it. What we ought to see here, if our democracy...
Wait a second, Rachel. A dozen, 100, 1,000? How many traitors are there? Sounds like you know.
Democracy is still kicking. What we ought to see here is a battalion of the highest end lawyers in the country flooding in to provide Chris Krebs and Miles Taylor with free legal representation.
But we're not finding that. We're not finding that.
And with the kind of no-holds-barred, super aggressive legal fight that Judge Ludig is describing today. Are we going to see it? As the biggest, poshest, most powerful law firms in the country, even tonight, continue to suck up to Trump and promise to do him favors in exchange for him no longer criticizing them or threatening them? Do we still have the juice as a country? Are we still kicking? Legal...
You can't talk about the juice, Rachel.
Profession, you still there? Are all the pretty words America's most prominent lawyers are famous for about the rule of law and no fear or favor, are all those just pretty words? Or are we going to see them show up? Because time's up. It is now. Everything you were supposedly preparing for, it's here.
Oh, no. Their army of lawyers that was meant to protect all of these people. It's falling apart right before our eyes. We're going to get to that in just a second. But rants quick. Steve Claybaugh, $10. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Steve. Steve's always there to check to, and it's in a good way. He checks my takes relative to a very sovereign orientation of constitutional understanding, a very original intent orientation to constitutional understanding. And I appreciate that very, very much, because I think that, first of all, I'm in a learning process when it comes to that. So it's very helpful. But I also think that we should hew toward that viewpoint and mindset, even if we think there are practical concerns that suggest another one. The practical concerns are arguments that we could have about potentially changing the Constitution in certain ways according to constitutional processes, but they're not reasons to intentionally misinterpret the Constitution in a way that supports or it handles in some sense our practical concerns. Caramaga, $5. I get it. APL. And it's okay to have a palate cleanse after Morning Joe and after Rachel Maddow. I think that that's called for. Starborn gifted 5 subscriptions. Thank you. Mary G. Rumbles, $10. Great show as always. Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much. And we shall continue. Let's go to Liz Harrington, former Trump spokeswoman. Is it okay to say woman? Person? She's talking about Chris Krebs on Truth Social. I'm a big fan of Liz Harrington. She's great. She is one of those people who has said the entire time, without fail, Donald Trump won, the 2020 election was stolen, Joe Biden is illegitimate. And I appreciate her for that. And she was also in the whole war room contingent during, I guess it would have been, 2020, 2021. And I don't know how long beyond that. But then she became President Trump's spokesperson. She said, this dude literally pretended Russia stole the 2016 election, but then said 2020 with millions of unsecure mail-in ballots with no chain of custody, unconstitutional election changes, halting the count, and then extending it for days. and where entire electronic records of early votes were deleted, like in Fulton County, Georgia. Among many other things, was the most secure election in history. And then she said, GTF out of here. I think that's what that means. Usually it's just GTFO, but she went with an extra O. GTFO. GTFO. Here's Chris Krebs.
2016 is what I've described at times as kind of the Sputnik moment for cybersecurity and foreign interference in the U.S. So nothing was particularly interesting or innovative or novel about what they did from a cyber perspective or really a disinfo perspective. But it was the first time that cyber, disinfo, hacking leaks intersected domestically with democracy. When Sputnik was launched into low Earth orbit, the reason that it resonated, at least with the national security complex, but also the American people, was not so much that we got beat to space by the Russians. I don't think that was it. It was the fact of how they did it and how they got it there. I mean, what is a rocket that sends a satellite to space? It is an intercontinental ballistic missile. And so the geographic isolation of the Atlantic, Pacific, and the polar ice caps was immediately overcome. And so at that point, it was like, oh boy, they can reach out and touch us really quickly. Same thing with 2016. Oh boy, they can reach out and touch our democracy and potentially, influence the way that we work as a government.
Wow. They're going to touch us. That actually makes me think of MacGruber. And I just have to, if you have not seen MacGruber, I would recommend that you absolutely do yourselves a favor, as long as you are not easily offended by crass, lowbrow humor, and you want to watch what might be the funniest movie of all time. Watch MacGruber. It's fantastic. Sooner or later, I'll choose it for Story Hour just to have some fun. But it is an absolutely wonderful film. So Chris Krebs, like so many others, believed in election interference, except in 2020. It was incredible, and it remains incredible how often we are accused of only questioning elections when our candidate loses, because that's them. That's them. That's what they do. I question elections all the time because elections are fake. They're obviously rigged and stolen. And when the TV announces that our favored candidate, Donald Trump in particular, has won, the election's still fake. Trump has an obvious and overwhelming mandate. And we have more indirect proof of that this week, by the way, that people have stayed with him and behind him through the ups and downs of the market, no matter how extreme the media campaign has been anti-Trump. His base has stayed, and it has grown over this week. And when Trump says something like, it'll be a good time to buy, and the market skyrockets, that's probably an indication that people listen to Donald Trump and take him seriously, not the other side, who is totally selling out the very last shreds of their credibility. And I won't go through it now, but Brian and I this morning on Badlands Daily, he found this clip from the man we just saw in that Morning Joe clip, Jim Vandehei from Axios, talking about how people had abandoned the media for a series of good reasons. And then, of course, he presents himself and his host, Barry Weiss, or whoever at the Mark Andreessen-sponsored Free Press that Barry Weiss runs. They were, of course, above that. They're the good journalists who care about objectivity. You can't tell where they're coming from politically, of course. Totally believable. But let's continue. So we mentioned Sussman Godfrey. This is the law firm that represented Dominion in Fox versus Dominion. Security clearances immediately suspended. Federal government's halting all material and services to Sussman. Refrain from hiring Sussman employees unless specifically authorized. no taxpayer dollars going to contractors, and all of the practices will be reviewed under Title VII to ensure compliance with civil rights laws against racial bias. And so that is very similar to all of the law firms that Trump has gone after so far and all the deals that he's made with law firms. They always address merit-based hiring practices, non-discriminatory hiring practices. And I think that that's probably a powerful angle, as I've said before, to take against these firms, because that's outside any of these evidence-based claims. Virtually everybody understands that race-based and sex-based, identity-based hiring practices, discriminatory hiring practices, they have to be if they're identity-based, have been a regular occurrence. Those are the sorts of things we don't even need more evidence of at this point. So that stuff's the unassailable part of these orders. President Trump believes that lawyers and law firms that engage in conduct detrimental to critical American interests should not be subsidized by American taxpayers or have access to our national secrets. Sussman spearheads efforts to weaponize the American legal system and degrade the quality of American elections. Sussman funds groups that engage in dangerous efforts to undermine the effectiveness of the U.S. military through the injection of political and radical ideology, and it supports efforts to discriminate on the basis of race. Sussman has been accused of engaging in unlawful discrimination, including on the basis of race. Sussman administers a program where it offers financial awards and employment opportunities only to students of color. And so that couldn't be any clearer. Now, that's become one of those things that by and large was accepted by society, at least for a while, if not still, but it's still discrimination. And formalized discrimination should not be a thing in our government. That is what we have been told. Or, well, it shouldn't be a thing in our government, that's for sure. And it shouldn't be a thing for government contractors. But for private organizations, if they want to hire, like if a magazine that produces content about Black America, for Black America, that's their target market, and they want to hire all Black people, go ahead. They just shouldn't get public money to sponsor those activities. And the same thing applies for law firms and whatever else, as far as I'm concerned. Let us continue. Trump today put out 2 very long posts on Truth Social. In fact, each post needed 2 posts. This was the first, and we're not going to go through this all the way, but he has come to more agreements with law firms. This one addresses Kirkland and Ellis, Allen, Overy, Shearman, Sterling, Simpson, Thatcher, and Bartlett, and Latham and Watkins. These are the law firms he's talking about here. These 4 law firms provide an aggregate total of at least $500 million in pro bono and other legal services. So $125 million each in pro bono legal services for people, organizations, and interests that were underrepresented before. And he includes here assisting veterans and other public servants, including among others, members of the military, Gold Star families, law enforcement, and first responders, ensuring fairness in our justice system and combating anti-Semitism. Always combating anti-Semitism. Hopefully they'll defeat it soon. It's going to work. Oh, man, it's just like when the Black Square defeated racism in June of 2020. Here is Trump's other post along these lines. Very, very similar in terms of the agreement reached. This is for Cadwallader, Wickersham, and Taft. I hope I'm saying that correctly. $100 million in pro bono legal services. And to the same sorts of interests, making sure that they will not discriminate due to politics, making sure that they're not discriminating due to identity concerns. And he went on. So we have two models. We have the law firms of the people involved in the Get Trump effort, those law firms defending Dominion and other companies like that. And then we have this series of agreements. And a lot of the companies that he's making these agreements with, at least some of the ones that were listed today, as I looked through them, you could see that they were clearly less aligned for the most part with those sorts of agendas in the past. But it's good that Trump is now, I guess, making the case. The interesting part, which I can't possibly know all of, except when the firms are doing really bad things, is what the leverage would be. Maybe it's just that they've served certain interests in the past and he's convinced them that it's in their interest to even these things out. It's possible that through the litigations against some of the firms or some of the individuals at firms that don't make agreements with the Trump administration, those firms might just lose their business. They might lose everything. If they're involved, if they were involved, and I think we have good reason to believe that they were, in the usurpation of the government and the overthrow of the government, the subversion of the United States of America, then who's going to shed a tear if they go out of business? And in that case, these firms that agree to work on behalf of the administration, which, if they're pursuing legitimate instances of treason, they'd be working on behalf of the country. So if this is the attorney army out there in public, these law firms that are going to accomplish these tasks, or maybe have in the past, and we haven't found out about them yet, more power to him. And every time he makes these announcements, it seems like they are timed specifically to deal with other elements of the news cycle. So while Trump was signing these orders the other day in his office, there was a very unusual attendee of one of these impromptu Trump press conferences, Governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. This is Fox News's coverage, and they have Donald Trump and his remarks.
We're honored to have Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan, great state of Michigan. And she's really done an excellent job. And a very good person. And we're working on the Selfridge, as you know, the air base. We're trying to get the air base open, keep it open. I think, Gretchen, if you're there, and Matt Hall, the Speaker of the House of Michigan. And he's been fantastic as the Speaker. I appreciate it. We won the state, Matt, and you helped me a lot.
I did, and you made me Speaker, so thank you, Mr.
Oh, I did. That's good, too. And Gretchen, I think everybody knows. So we're working on that very hard, and I think we'll come home with a winner for Michigan, okay? I just spoke with the Secretary of Defense. Sometimes we call him the Secretary of War. It used to be called the Secretary of War. They changed it when we became a little bit politically correct. But I think we're in great shape. We're going to be in great shape. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much, Matt. Congratulations. Great.
Okay, so Gretchen Whitmer was in the Oval Office while Donald Trump is going after Dominion and Chris Krebs. Gretchen Whitmer oversaw one of the main hubs of election theft in 2020. So it's odd that she's there. Whitmer was there for, where is it? Here it is. Here's the statement from her office, because of course people got upset that she was there while Trump was signing these things. And there's like a picture of her looking very sad. Actually, hold for processing. Let me see if I can find this. It's kind of funny. Here it is. Here is Big Gretch, as they tried to market her. I guess that was supposed to make her sound powerful or something. Doesn't look too happy there. She's in front of the door, just kind of head down, standing by herself. Now, you know, a still picture is not always the best way to judge what someone's overall attitude at an event was, but they did catch her in a funny moment. So back to that Fox News article. This is the statement from Whitmer's office. At the White House today, Governor Whitmer had a meeting with Speaker Hall and President Trump to discuss the northern Michigan ice storm, investing in Michigan's defense assets like Selfridge Air National Guard Base, tariffs, and the importance of creating good-paying American jobs and bringing back critical supply chains and keeping our Great Lakes clean and safe. Governor Whitmer thanks President Trump for his acknowledgments on protecting the Great Lakes from invasive carp, his work on Selfridge, and his openness to our request for help in northern Michigan. This morning, the governor delivered a speech in Washington, D.C. about the devastating effects tariffs were having on Michiganders, from companies increasing prices and laying off workers to retirement accounts being wiped out. This afternoon, the 90-day pause was announced, and that is a step in the right direction, and blah, blah, blah. So Gretchen Whitmer, in the Oval Office, I don't know if you remember, but John Poulos, who I believe was the CEO of Dominion at the time. Let me just check with the machine. What was John Poulos's role with Dominion in 2020? Yes, he's the CEO. And so he did a hearing in Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. And I would suggest, his most notable action was testifying before the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee on December 15th, 2020, where he, quote unquote, according to the machine, refuted false claims about the elections and Dominion voting systems. We shall see. We shall see. I'm not sure they were false claims, and John Poulos might have a bad time. But so that was in Michigan. Michigan was where Wayne County was a mess. I think that was the site of the pizza boxes up. It was also the place where I think it was the Wayne County supervisors were going to refuse to certify the election. And then they received an enormous number of threats, and Trump kind of made deals with them. We covered this on Hindsight 2020 last year as we were going back through some of that. It's interesting stuff to go back and take a look at. But Gretchen Whitmer in there while Trump is going after Dominion and Chris Krebs for election-related activity, and Sussman and Godfrey for election-related activity, not Dominion directly, I should say. That's awfully interesting timing. And there's this. This was yesterday in a Senate, in a Senate hearing. This is Joe Kent in an exchange with supposed senator from Arizona, Mark Kelly.
Was intentionally organized or directed?
Still under investigation. We're looking into whether elements of the government could have enhanced the criminal acuity of some of the rioters that day.
So you've said on Twitter that the FBI and the intelligence community were involved in planning and directing the riot. Is that correct?
Sounds like something I said, yeah.
And what evidence do you have for that claim?
So we've already identified that there were multiple confidential human informants ran by the FBI and other law enforcement agencies that were present in the crowd that day, directing, removing barriers, those types of things. This has been investigated widely. We're continuing to look into it. The intelligence, I would say the FBI and other elements of the law enforcement apparatus attempted to suppress the fact that there was undercover confidential human informants that were part of these different groups. We also had intelligence leading up to January 6th that there was going to be violence that day. So that speaks to some degree of intelligence infiltration into some of these groups and organizations.
Who within the FBI?
We're looking into that right now.
Which departments of the FBI?
Probably the Washington field office.
So you believe the Washington field office was involved in the planning of the violence in the building next door on January 6th?
It's being looked into. I mean, look, we had
and who is looking into it?
We are in the intelligence community. Yeah, we're looking into it right now.
And do you believe that the IC conducts actions of this nature against Americans?
Does the IC, both the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, entrapping individuals? If you look at who was running the Washington field office during January 6th, it was Stephen D'Antuono. He was also running the field office in Michigan, where many of the defendants were let go after they were accused of attempting to kidnap the governor, because the vast majority of them were undercover FBI confidential informants. So unfortunately, this behavior does happen by members of law enforcement and the intelligence community, and it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are transparent with the American people.
Mr. Kent, would you be willing to share this evidence of this investigation with this committee?
I look forward to it, Senator.
All right.
So that is rather powerful stuff to be said in that sort of setting. And we can hope that that stuff goes widely. I think that we're in a massive disclosure stage right now. I talked about this a little bit on Badlands Daily this morning. You know, I've said over and over again that I think that we're kind of going to see a phase shift when we have the military parade, as we talked about on Monday, for Trump's birthday celebration, which just so happens to coincide with Flag Day and the formation of the Continental Army in 1775, the beginning of America's 250th birthday party that Trump has announced for years. It's being kind of reframed as his birthday party to make it sound like it's all egocentric and the rest of it. But I would expect, like I've thought for a while, you guys have heard me say on the show before, that I thought this period was going to run until the end of May or the middle of June. And so I think that these 2 months, we are seeing this just nonstop disclosure and exposure phase where the changeover is really happening. Now, part of that changeover is scripted with the Great Reset, and that's what we talk about quite often, hijacking the Great Reset by dominating narratives and shifting public sentiment in certain directions so that people will understand things in a certain way, move in a certain way, and through the beliefs, the actions spawned on the basis of those beliefs, create the country in a way that mirrors and reflects American values rather than the technocratic system of control offered by the Great Resetters. It seems like we are getting well on down these roads. And mentioning Stephen D'Antuono coming from the Detroit field office to the Washington, D.C. field office, and then being involved in the very violent insurrection, after being the coordinator of the FBI agents and informants who plotted the so-called Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping attempt, cutting pretty close to the marrow at this point. And I think that that's awfully exciting stuff. IHNTWBD56 in the chat, $5. Chris, love your live show. Blessings always. Nana Girl. Org Nana Girl? Well, Nana Girl, thank you. Let us continue. So, the Sussman and Godfrey issue. Let's just go through the background section of Trump's order, addressing risks from Sussman Godfrey. Lawyers and law firms that engage in activities detrimental to critical American interests should not have access to our nation's secrets, nor should their conduct be subsidized by federal taxpayer funds or contracts. And again, very standard, the military stuff. We went through some of this. Students of color. This is coming into play right now. At the same time, we have this, if it pulls up. Here we are. This is CNBC, but reprinting a Reuters article. This is from Wednesday. Delaware judge rules Newsmax coverage of Dominion voting systems was false and defamatory. So this happens the same day that the Trump Sussman Godfrey order drops, when Gretchen Whitmer is in the room. Is all of this, is the convergence of these timelines a coincidence? You're going to have to answer that for yourself based on your worldview broadly, your view of this situation that we've been witnessing over the past few years, how you think that has evolved. But it seems kind of planned out. It seems kind of scripted. It seems kind of structured. Now, I have no doubts about Trump's intentions, but we know that the enemy scripts and structures their plans. And we know that there are a number of those plans based on different factions, intentions. And we know that there are responses planned as well. And so this all seems to be forward movement from our side, which is awesome. But it's always important to understand that the acknowledgement of a pattern, the ability to match aspects of a pattern, is not then suggestive that the pattern means everything is good. And I think that that's something that the truth community continually runs themselves into walls over. Like, we don't have to assume that because we can detect a pattern, that means that everything is going perfectly according to the plans of our side. Now, I have no question that our side is doing really well. And I think that we're going to be entirely successful. I'm as optimistic as I've ever been about that top line stuff. But in terms of people understanding it and our ability to move forward as the people who operate a government of, by, and for the people, that's got to be pushed forward as well. And that can only be pushed forward through people's growing understanding of what's happening. Some of that requires some open-mindedness and looking at these issues in multiple ways. And it's weird that an attempt to do that is so often construed as dooming, or now I'm accused of not cheerleading hard enough. Newsmax Media published defamatory and false statements accusing Dominion voting systems of rigging the 2020 election, a Delaware judge ruled Wednesday. Though a jury must still decide whether the conservative news outlet is on the hook for damages. The ruling by Delaware Superior Court Judge Eric Davis is a partial victory for Dominion in its $1.6 billion lawsuit, but leaves Newsmax with other possible legal defenses at a trial scheduled to begin on April 28th in Wilmington. A Dominion representative said in a statement that the company was gratified by the court's thorough ruling. Oh, yeah, it must be totally thorough. A Newsmax representative said in a statement that the outlet covered both sides of the 2020 election fairly and called the case a threat to free speech and the free press. Shares of Newsmax were down more than 10% in late Wednesday trading, while broader stock indexes were posting their biggest rally in years, blah, blah, blah. Denver-based Dominion sued Newsmax in 2021 for broadcasting false claims that Dominion machines stole the election from President Trump, who was defeated by the fake President Joe Biden, supposedly. Trump spent weeks after the vote, blah, 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 blah. Hold on. Where was the part that I wanted? Davis said that Newsmax's statements that Dominion aided in election fraud, manipulated votes using an algorithm, was linked to Venezuela, paid kickbacks to government officials, and was tied to voting irregularities in Dallas were false and amounted to defamation. Dominion must still prove at trial that Newsmax either knew the statements were false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth, a legal standard known as actual malice. I am very interested to see how this goes at the end of the month. So it's starting April 28th. And it might just be on whether or not they're able to prove actual malice and lock down a defamation claim. But we might get some of the factual claims, and potentially maybe some of those will be rehashed. You have to wonder if the evidence from Curling v. Raffensperger, despite the case's dismissal last week, could be entered because, again, J. Alex Halderman, the country's foremost expert on the cybersecurity of election systems, has had it in evidence in that case for years and years now that the machines cannot be depended on to reliably produce a result that reflects the will and intent of the voters. That was in the Fox Dominion suit as well. And that's in Dominion's own discovery documents, which is why I believe that was a friendly settlement. And I think understanding that, then we can begin to reflect on some of these decisions in different ways. But we shall see. Newsmax, started by Chris Ruddy. Chris Ruddy is a friend of Donald Trump. Is there some connection, some role there? We'll find out. I think that we're in the finding out phase. Finally, a lot of these things that we've speculated about over the course of years, maybe we're gonna kinda get some answers on this at some point. We can hope so, at least. Continuing. And in terms of the exposure and disclosure phase, this is Tulsi Gabbard yesterday.
We have the best of the best going after this, election integrity being one of them. We have evidence of how these electronic voting systems have been vulnerable to hackers for a very long time and vulnerable to exploitation to manipulate the results of the votes being cast, which further drives forward your mandate to bring about paper ballots across the country so that voters can have faith in the integrity of our elections.
So is that a big deal? That's the question. I responded to that yesterday, and people got mad because they're too retarded to understand what I'm saying. Those claims don't become true when one of the TV characters says it on TV. Will that claim go more viral than all of the claims that have been made in the past? Will that claim trigger something in the normie sphere that was not there before? Or is that just additional narrative momentum in a direction? I'm not mad that she made the claim. It's just not new information. We already knew that. The Halderman evidence has been there for years. The report has been public in redacted form, but it's been public for years. Is that the evidence she's referring to? Is that evidence now accessible because the Curling v. Raffensperger case has been closed? Was it closed to allow for stuff like this to happen? Or use in these sorts of litigations? Or use in an investigation against the law firm representing Dominion? For use in an investigation of Chris Krebs? Who knows? These are the potential possibilities that are emerging before us as these new events occur. I don't know what it's going to be. I think it's very interesting that on the same day we got the curling decision, earlier in that day, Trump's DOJ dismissed a lawsuit attempting to enjoin, I think it was an injunction, against Georgia legislation for election integrity. I think all of these things are part of the same whole. And let's go back to Liz Harrington for just a second. This is her again on Truth Social from this morning. What Tulsi Gabbard announced at the cabinet meeting about the voting machines yesterday was a game changer. Go public, expose the fraud, get accountability, and get real elections. 100%.
To me that the ball is rolling forward, that Donald Trump is actually making sure this gets done, and sooner rather than later, because of course the midterms hinges on this, right? Cleaning this up. His ability to implement his agenda depends on cleaning this up, and really his legacy depends on cleaning this up. I know that Tulsi Gabbard and her team were briefed recently, I won't give exactly when, on some evidence of that is very damning for the voting machines. And I was told that her and her team were blown away. And I feel like you could see that, you could sense that in what she said in the cabinet meeting there, Liz.
Right. And this is exactly what I've been hoping and praying for, that all you need to do is just expose how corrupt this is. It's just one area. I mean, the machines is a huge part of it. Just put it out there, and then you have a mandate to get the change that the American people want, that the American people vote for, that they absolutely need. This is huge. So if she's going to go public with all of this, and the American people can see for themselves just how disgusting and vulnerable, and how these machines and how our elections have been subverted, and they can see it for themselves, I mean, that will be a huge game changer. And it has to come out. It has to be public. Like so many other things that they're discussing, exposing this government corruption is a huge priority. And that's how you get real change. And the amazing thing too, Emerald, when you're talking about that background with Krebs and to where we are now, think about where we could have been. I mean, with these people running things, it would be over. And now we have, by the grace of God, a real chance to get real elections in this country. I mean, you just couldn't be happier. Keep pushing forward. Do it, Tulsi. Go public. This is amazing stuff that the people need to know and need to see for themselves.
Good for Liz Harrington. I'm glad that we are in this phase. I'm glad it's happening. Got to wait and see what Tulsi Gabbard's going to show us. And again, we should not need, with a proper epistemology, we should not need Tulsi Gabbard to give us special secret evidence that's been held back for whatever reason for 4.5 years now. There's no proof that our elections are legitimate, and they don't let us check. The system is complicated. It's not transparent. There are errors all the time. No one should feel secure in handing over power to these people we're told we have elected as our public servants in this system. This system cannot produce legitimate outcomes, okay? That's all you need to say these elections are fake. That's the only standard you got to meet. And instead, we've had this mass media campaign to make us believe that these elections, despite the convolutedness of the system, the complications, the loopholes, the abuse, the obvious malfeasance, the attempt to constantly change laws, the attempts through litigation to make sure no one can ever check, all of that. And we're still supposed to just believe that the elections are free and fair, safe and secure, and accurately reflect the will and intent of the voters. That's preposterous. We shouldn't need the evidence, and the evidence has already been public for years and years and years. And in fact, I mean, people are like, well, okay, but this is going to get the normie sphere now. Really? There was an HBO documentary called Kill Chain featuring Democrats talking about how the election systems and the machines were messed up. People have known the election systems, the machines were messed up since the early 2000s. People know the information. So the problem is they need to wait for the television to tell them, yes, the reality you've understood for years is real. And then what are we doing? We are still just marching along, following the television, and we are supposed to applaud like seals and hold our bowl out, begging for more gruel. Oh, thank goodness you finally told us. It is our responsibility as Americans. The founders would have laughed at that. It's a preposterous notion that we're all just supposed to sit back and watch this television show and just applaud because someday the normies might finally be awoken. It's unbelievable. These are things that the people need to take the lead on. Publicly, loudly, no fear attached. Don't make claims that you can't substantiate. I'm not saying that. But everybody can say, I don't have trust in these systems, knowing that voter rolls are inflated by hundreds of thousands of votes in state after state after state after state, and that there's no chain of custody on the ballots. Those two things alone should say, well, this election system can never guarantee legitimate results. But we need the TV characters to tell us. If that's where we are after all this time, what's happening on the top line, all good. That problem at the level of the people has to be solved. And it's not solved by people playing the match game and cheerleading. Sorry. Let us continue. Let's go to China, and we'll talk about tariffs in China. Here is Donald Trump on Truth Social from just this morning. We are doing really well on our tariff policy. Very exciting for America and the world. It is moving along quickly. DJT. Well, okay. The White House yesterday put out a communication. The Trump effect, Americans see first price relief in years. And what this does is go through example after example. Some of them are from mainstream media, CNBC, CNN, USA Today, Axios, Bloomberg, CNN, Associated Press, Wall Street Journal, Breitbart, Washington Post, talking about inflation dropping, prices finally coming down, the economy actually doing well. Inflation cools more than expected, says Barron's. U.S. consumer prices post first decline in nearly 5 years, says Reuters. Just example after example after example. That is in complete conflict with the central theme of the media communications we've been receiving all week long. So I think it's great that Trump is putting those things out there because, again, no matter what the reality is underlying any of this, what matters is what people believe about that reality. And when we are constantly subject to psychological operations incoming from all directions, including often our own, it's very hard to know what to believe. And again, that's part of the destabilization. It's part of the chaos to cause anxiety, to make people reject changes that need to happen, even changes that are just obviously positive. And that's been part of the interference operation throughout Trump's now 8+ years in office. Triggering. It's so triggering. Speaking of China, this was a funny moment. Actually, hold on for 1 second. Let's, pardon me. I had one more link that did not copy, that I did not paste into my document of links. So hold for processing for just a moment. Here we are. Now, of course, I have to mention this because of my relationship with Hollywood and the entertainment industry. CNBC, from today, Hollywood's Chinese box office was already in decline even before Trump's tariffs. Hollywood is being pulled into President Donald Trump's trade war. After Trump escalated tariffs on Chinese imports earlier this week, the Chinese government retaliated, including by restricting the number of Hollywood films it would allow to be showcased in its movie theaters. The Chinese box office was once a coveted space for American-made movies, so much so that studios produced films that would appeal directly to an international audience. However, as China has expanded its local film production, its audiences have gravitated toward the country's own domestic fare, and Hollywood films have seen a significant decline in ticket sales from the region. Now, Hollywood blockbusters were catering specifically to China and Chinese interests insofar as, that's represented by the CCP's interests. And as we often talk about, it's the evil twin faction in China, evil twin faction in the United States, their CCP, our uniparty. The entertainment industry serves the global regime of which those are both part. And so we can see the obvious means of coordination there. Americans are rejecting Hollywood films. Chinese are rejecting Hollywood propaganda and replacing it with their own films. And I would guess films less oriented toward regime propaganda. I don't know that to be true because I'm not a connoisseur of Chinese films, but I would suspect that's the case because that's what the trends would suggest. Trump addressed this yesterday in the cabinet meeting. Here we are.
By reducing the number of American films that can be shown there. What's your reaction to them now targeting cultural exports from the United States?
I think I've heard of worse things. Yes, please.
Also on China.
Trump just straight up does not give a darn, let's say, give a heck about Hollywood and their potential suffering as a result of this Chinese retaliation. Is it because of Trump's tariffs, or is it because China doesn't want Hollywood propaganda blasted around their country? And can you blame them? We are seeing the regime propaganda apparatus around the world being taken apart. And I got to think that's a good thing. I don't like being propagandized by these people, and I doubt that you do. And to prevent that from happening in other countries seems like kind of our moral responsibility, understanding what it's like having it done to us for our entire lives. That's my point of view. Some people are like, well, yeah, but we need to do it so that we are strong relative to those countries. I think there's other ways to be strong relative to these other countries beyond infiltrating their societies and attempting to subvert their cultures. It's just me. Speaking of Chinese culture and how it's separate from, how parts of it, I should say, are separate from the global regime's agenda and influence. You know, I played Steve Bannon last week talking about how we are kind of concluding World War II throughout this process. Here is Steve Bannon talking about some of the history of China.
We've talked about it on the show for years and years and years. We consider this show to be the lead in the effort to back Lao Beijing, because the United States and people in the United States can't take down the Chinese Communist Party. Their legitimacy is questioned by their citizens. And Lao Beijing, that's a term of endearment in China. That means old 100 names. There's essentially, roughly, mythically 100 last names in China. And so old 100 names is what they say is kind of John Q. Public, or the little guy, right? He's the guy that everything kind of happens to, but it's on his shoulders that the whole country kind of exists. So it's a term of endearment, Lao Beijing. And it's only the Lao Beijing can make a decision about who rules them and who governs them. But I will tell you, they have no love for the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party is now in a huge crisis internally about legitimacy, because even from the founding of the People's Republic of China, it's been very questionable actually how they came to power. They weren't democratically elected. They never opened up to elections. They never opened up to the sovereign will of the people. They took control, and they took control with a bunch of different institutions and people helping them is one of the big controversies. It's really what started off the whole situation with McCarthy. This is kind of lost in time. They think it was internal. It didn't start with that. It started in the late 1940s with Time magazine and with others in the what they called the China hands, or people in the United States that were very close to China. The question was, who lost China? They had been an ally in World War II. They had taken the brunt of the Japanese Imperial Army on mainland China. They lost tens of millions of people. It was brutal. Some of that was fighting each other. The Chinese were very good at fighting each other and not really fighting the Japanese. But it kind of came as a shock to the basic average American that China turned out to be communist after the war. There was a lot of questions. The Chinese Communist Party has always internally had an issue with their own legitimacy. Wang Xishan and others have led an effort for years about how to do that, because they realize they only exist because they've made a Faustian pact with the people of China that we will give you tremendous economic returns and really bring you into the middle class, okay? But at the cost of no political freedom and no real freedom. It's run as essentially a slave labor camp. The elites on Wall Street know that. They knew that in 1989 when Tiananmen happened. That was Bush's first and only term. The Clintons knew it when the Clintons had the Chinese generals coming into the White House with bags of cash. The fix has been in by our governing class, by the investment banks, by the providers of capital, to essentially shift capital out of the United States and away from manufacturing to what was essentially a slave labor camp in China. This has been brewing for years. And Kevin O'Leary gave just a magnificent summary on CNN the other night. And it's a good lesson, I think, for and maybe I'll play it later today. It's a good lesson for the war room posse, because these are things we talk about, if not every day, every other day, for years and years and years. And particularly at the beginning of the show, when we started 5 years ago and we shifted from impeachment to pandemic, why were we the first people on pandemic? Well, given our knowledge of China, given the relationships we have, we knew immediately this was going to be a huge deal. When other
So, does that sound like China is just forever the Chinese Communist Party and our enemy, our greatest adversary, people who we should want to destroy? That's not how that sounds to me. That sounds like the people of that country, similar to the people of Russia, the people of many other nations around the world, have been subject to the exact same thing that we have been subject to. And part of it is at our hands, not ours personally, but through the enforcement mechanisms of the American military, the American economy, etc., American culture. Donald Trump on Xi Jinping yesterday.
They've really taken advantage of our country for a long period of time. They've ripped us off beyond nobody. How people stood for it, sitting in my position, is not even believable. And we're talking about many presidents, not just a couple. But they did, and all we're doing is putting it back in shape. We're resetting the table. And I'm sure that we'll be able to get along very well. I have great respect for President Xi. He's been, in a true sense, he's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. And I think that we'll end up working out something that's very good for both countries. I look forward to it.
So she is, in a true sense, a friend of Donald Trump's for a long period of time. Our war is clearly not with the people of China. I would again suggest for your consideration that when we are talking about China in terms of the threat they pose, and we are talking about the economic war, the trade war with China, China in that sense is being used as a narrative avatar for the global evil twin, the global regime's representative in China, the Chinese Communist Party. Okay. Same as our American Union Party. We heard yesterday there's some negotiation going on between the European Union and China to eliminate tariffs on Chinese electric cars that were just put in place last year. You would expect that the European Union, for instance, was trying to shift part of the if the Chinese economy aligned with the global evil twin is going to see a financial impact, if the companies are, if the markets are, et cetera, based on these tariffs and the further decoupling of these two nations, well, then they would try to make up for that somewhere else. And so you would then anticipate that governments aligned with and economies aligned with the global regime and the implementation of that agenda would do what they could to support the system that exists, which means supporting the manufacturing in China, for instance, to help their aligned interests withstand the economic and trade warfare. I hope that makes sense. And I think that we are seeing signs that suggest this is not just some economic or trade war with the intent to destroy China as China. It is to destroy that global economic system, top-down, centralized control that we've been dealing with throughout our lives. This is The Economist from earlier this week, and I'm just going to touch on one short piece of this, why China thinks it might win a trade war with Trump. Really interesting down here at the end. Mr. Xi will also need to consider if he is willing to see China's economy fully decouple from America's. Although China has been pursuing technological self-reliance, it has largely rejected the notion of decoupling, seeing it as a way for the West to punish China. So what we're seeing from a good twin, evil twin perspective is a decoupling that began in 2020 and probably before. In its later stages, where that decoupling is becoming very real. It was efforts toward decoupling. Now that decoupling is being seen in a real sense. And America says, Donald Trump says, your tariffs are going to be 54%. Now they're going to be 125%. Now they're going to be 145%. And China says, oh yeah, well, we're going to give you 80% tariffs and 140% tariffs or whatever they're on right now. But it's this back and forth, this escalation, making it clear that they are not going to be doing business on those levels at all. It's going to be totally separate because that's the end state of continued escalation along those tariff lines. Eventually, it doesn't become profitable for anybody to be selling goods in the other country, which means that they are decoupled. We're being told by the mouthpiece of the global regime, The Economist, that China has always largely rejected the notion of decoupling, seeing it as a way for the West to punish China. They are speaking as the mouthpiece of the global regime here. So they've largely rejected decoupling, but that's what we're seeing anyway. And we're seeing China in the form of Xi Jinping and the response to Donald Trump in the public narrative throughout this process, doing the very thing that would make decoupling a given. And let's just read to the end here. Now, however, there is growing support for it. So all of a sudden, decoupling's on the table. A short list of planned responses posted online by various well-connected commentators on April 8th suggests that China is considering the suspension of all cooperation with America on fentanyl. Really? Trump's the one who put that in place as a big part of his agenda in 2020. He's told that story over and over again. China was prepared to stop it all. And they were going to prosecute the offenders. Quick trial. Does everybody remember quick trial? And now they're going to stop cooperating when it comes to fentanyl? Well, if that's true, does it matter at this point? As Trump designates cartels as terrorist organizations and closes the border, etc. Another idea is to ban imports of American poultry and other agricultural products such as soybeans and sorghum, which mainly come from Republican states. So they're going to threaten the red states and American agriculture, and that's going to further the decoupling and further the retaliation. And that is supposed to, whose efforts does that suggest are being enhanced in these ways? That would be the global evil twin, the regime's interests in China, and affecting political interests to increase pressure on Donald Trump in America. All of this, if Donald Trump was fighting a war against the global regime and Xi Jinping is as well, it seems, they are speaking on behalf of the regime, countering and retaliating in that warfare. China may impose restrictions on American services too, where Uncle Sam still runs a trade surplus. This would include restrictions on American consultancies and law firms still operating in the country. It could also probe intellectual property held by American firms. These IP holdings may constitute monopolies and earn excess profits, according to one influential blogger who goes on to say that China's success with an animated film called Ne Zha 2 and the poor performance of Snow White in America could help justify reducing imports of American films or banning them altogether. If fighting to the end means matching any new American tariffs, Mr. Xi will have to bite the apple of decoupling. And I don't even see that as something that Xi would be opposed to in the long term. If Xi is a friend of Donald Trump, and he sounds like he is, and if Steve Bannon is correct about our relationship with China, the wants and needs and desires of the Chinese people, and they conform to the same pattern that we see here in America, which is an insight that is enabled by understanding things as good twin through the good twin, evil twin paradigm, rather than understanding China as a nation. The picture changes completely. What would it be like if the representation of America while Donald Trump is president was always read through the avatar of our bluest states and bluest cities, right? Gavin Newsom is speaking to the world. Oh, Gavin Newsom's doing XYZ in California. And you're saying that's Donald Trump's America? Imagine ascribing the governing style, the policies, the agenda of Gavin Newsom to Donald Trump because Trump is president at the same time that Gavin Newsom is governor. That wouldn't make any sense at all. But yet we're led to believe that in other countries, they operate as one cohesive whole behind one leader. And all of that is the same political movement and political agenda, while we can see a number of agendas being pursued at the same time, and while we understand shadow governments set up around the world, proxy states, and the rest of it. It's just a different way of looking at things. And I think pretty consistently over the past few years, this way of looking at things has provided insights that allow us to understand what's going to happen in the future in ways that the TV understanding and the indoctrinated, brainwashed understanding that we've been convinced is how the world works, of this country does this country does that. I don't think there's any comparison between the success and the insights of those two groups, or of those two different ways of looking at the world, let's say. Let us continue. We are also being told that this is how China is going to beat us. And again, The Economist, mouthpiece, one of the elite mouthpieces of the global regime. China has a weapon that could hurt America. Rare earth exports. Rare earths again. And we're not going to go through the argument here. They have problems that they go through. This is why the rare earth thing could be the way that they compete. And then we get to the end. Admittedly, banning rare earth exports would hurt China itself, since it would destroy demand. In 2010, amid a fishing dispute, China stopped rare earth exports to Japan. Within months, Japan made concessions and exports resumed. In the meantime, Japan's car makers had designed new vehicles that relied less heavily on rare earths. This time, it is more likely that China would reduce exports to America selectively, unless Mr. Trump continues with his aggressive approach. The world's most consequential Scrabble game might then turn truly nasty. These writers are ridiculous. They really are ridiculous. So rare earths are necessary for high tech, but also they're already inventing their way out of needing rare earths. And also, rare earths are going to be the thing that dictates the end of the Russia-Ukraine war. Does any of this make sense? No, it does not make sense. I really do need to clip that from South Park. the Chewbacca defense. It does not make sense. And you know what? Let's pause briefly for a message from this here free speech platform, our friends at Rumble. This sponsorship is from Rumble, one that is incredibly important to the survival of the country. Company. Also country. We need free speech for the country's survival. We need Rumble Premium for Rumble's survival. When Rumble first started in 2013, they built a platform for the small creator. They didn't censor or have biases. They were fair and treated all creators equally. No one thought platforms would censor political conversation or censor opinions on COVID, but they did. Facebook admitted they fell to pressure from the Biden-Harris administration. Rumble did not. They held the line. They are attacked daily for giving us a voice to talk to you. They are attacked in corporate media. They are attacked by governments like France. They are attacked from brand advertisers who refuse to work with them. Corporate America is fighting to remove speech. Rumble is fighting to keep it. Rumble won't survive with brand advertisers. They don't get much of it. Watching our shows on Rumble is the most they can ask. But if you really believe in this fight and you have the means, one major way you can help Rumble survive is by joining Rumble Premium. Join the community that believes in the First Amendment and believes in our human right to free speech. Rumble's offering $10 off with the promo code STUDIO when you purchase an annual subscription. Go to rumble.com/premium and use promo code STUDIO. Like I said, if you have the means and the belief in the cause, now's the time to join Rumble Premium. And if you don't, Rumble is just happy that you are watching shows like this one on this platform. And oh yeah, by the way, if you have Rumble Premium, you can watch the Wednesday subscriber streams here on Rumble rather than on Substack alone. And if that's your preferred viewing experience and your preferred chat experience, you will be able to do that with a Rumble Premium subscription. Let us continue. China. Actually, that's all I have for China. Let's move on to Mike Johnson's package. This is Donald Trump in the morning yesterday, after we had been told Wednesday night that the approval of Mike Johnson's package would be delayed. He says, great news. The big, beautiful bill is coming along really well. Republicans are working together nicely. Biggest tax cuts in USA history. Getting close. DJT. Getting close to the package. And you don't want to get too close to the package until you really know what it's all about. It might be big. It might be beautiful. And congratulations to Mike Johnson on that. But, you know, the Congress, I don't know how any of those members can prove that they were actually elected and have the people's legitimate authority to pass legislation. And I certainly don't know how the Senate could then pass it, because that's a mess over there. But we're going to see how this moves forward. Trump keeps calling it the most important piece of legislation that has ever been considered. Is there other stuff in there that we're not being told about? I guess we can find out. And however it works as a sifter, whatever issues it introduces into the public conversation, all of these things can be wonderful aspects of Mike Johnson's package. But a massive spending bill that's going to get passed so that the government can continue spending forever in all of its legitimacy. Not a huge fan of that. At the very least, I'll give Trump the benefit of the doubt that he's got some good outcome in mind. Oh man, it didn't work.
I mean, as long as you're reasonable. You have to be reasonable. We have to be reasonable. Thank you very much.
I can be reasonable. I can see what happens with Mike Johnson's package. I just don't trust it right now. I'm told it's big and beautiful. He's shown it to us before. And to be honest, those times, not big and beautiful. I mean, it was big, I guess. but not beautiful. I mean, what was that whole unipartisan compromise on immigration? We've had so many versions over the last year and a half. Maybe this will be the one. I don't know.
Votes to finally adopt the budget resolution so we can move forward on President Trump's very important agenda for the American people. This process has required a lot of close consultation between the White House and the Senate. And all of that has been necessary because we want to make sure that we are delivering on our shared goals in the budget reconciliation process. Our big, beautiful bill has to reflect all of that. And so it is big, and it involves a lot of areas of policy, and so it requires a lot of close coordination. Our two chambers are directly aligned also on a very important principle, and that is the principle of fiscal responsibility. We are the party that delivers and ensures that. So we have a number of aims here. Our aim is to deliver on our promises in this big, beautiful bill regarding things like border security, restoring peace through strength, and American energy dominance, and regulatory reform to get the economy really humming again. And of course also tax relief, tax reductions. We have to make the tax cuts permanent, and that's all involved and enveloped in this big effort, and all the other promises and priorities we made. Now, it's important to note that at the same time, we also need to achieve the maximum amount of savings for the American people, because that's what fiscal responsibility is. And we even want to start reducing the deficit. So with all that in mind, our first big, beautiful reconciliation package here involves a number of commitments, and one of those is that we are committed to finding at least $1.5 trillion in savings for the American people, while also preserving our essential programs. The Democrats are out right now trying to make hay out of the fact that we're going to gut Medicaid and all these other things. They're just simply not true.
Mike Johnson's package. Donald Trump responded yesterday. Congratulations to the House on the passage of a bill that sets the stage for one of the greatest and most important signings in the history of our country. Among many other things, it will be the largest tax and regulation cuts ever even contemplated. Make America great again. And there is an article on this that I had up. I'm just going to have to find this once again. Hold for processing. Apologies. Where did it go? Maybe I will just describe it. Oh, here we are. So this is the article about the delay reported Wednesday night. And just where'd it go? This was happening. Oh, there we are. There we are. Okay, good. House Speaker. Oh, sorry. It's so strange. They have the on the bar in my browser, it has the old headline. Mike Johnson punts House vote on Trump tax agenda after GOP rebellion threatened defeat. And we are supposed to believe that Mike Johnson was dealing with a rebellion among his caucus. Let's go halfway down the article. Tensions were high for those GOP lawmakers who remained on the House floor, Fox News Digital was told. And much of that frustration is aimed at Johnson. I think he's quickly losing faith from the rest of us. I mean, he kept the entire conference out on the floor for 80 minutes while you play grab ass with these people. One House Republican fumed. And all day it was like, oh, we're going to get this done. All the chatter we were hearing was holdouts were down to single digits, but 17, 20 people were in that room. So clearly there was a much bigger problem than they were letting on all day. And I guess that disappeared, but we had to get this out there. One totally unnamed Republican letting us know that Mike Johnson is going to lose his caucus right when he's about to show off his big blue package or big, beautiful package. Wow. Friday afternoon, man. What do you want me to do? The gap between the House and Senate versions is significant. The House version that passed in late February calls for at least $1.5 trillion in spending cuts, while the Senate's plan mandates at least $4 billion. So 1,500 billion compared to 4 billion. Yeah, sure, they'll figure out that. They'll bridge that divide. Some conservatives are also wary of congressional leaders looking to use the current policy baseline to factor the total amount of dollars the bill will add to the federal deficit. The current policy baseline allows lawmakers to essentially zero out the cost of extending Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act because they are already in effect. And what they want is for us in the public, because that's all that matters here, is public perception of what's happening. For us to assume that the tax cuts have already expired and that putting the tax cuts back means that there is a cost attached to them, rather than just understanding if the tax cuts stay in place, nothing changes. They want to tell the public that Donald Trump has actually spent all this money by keeping tax cuts in place. Taxes shouldn't be in place in the first place. So I don't know what they're talking about. That's just a marketing scam that they are clearly happy to advertise to the American public as such. Hey, this is what we're actually doing. No, it isn't. Couple interesting stories on the science front. And you know what? I forgot to download that RFK clip from yesterday, but that is certainly important. Talking about the study, I guess they're going to do a study, or they're doing a study on autism and the causes of autism. And that will be released in September for some reason.
1 in 10,000 children had autism, and now it's 1 in 31. Not 31,000, 31. That's a horrible statistic, isn't it? And there's got to be something artificial out there that's doing this. So you think you're going to have a pretty good idea, huh?
We will know by September.
There will be no bigger news conference than that. So that's it. If you can come up with that answer where you stop taking something, you stop eating something, or maybe it's a shot, but something's causing it. It can't be from 10,000 to, can you imagine that, Marco? That's a big number.
All I could think about while watching that was the effort by the Ron DeSantis supporters who are currently Trump aligned and were Trump aligned in the first term, but then weren't Trump aligned and were very anti-Trump and anti-MAGA and anti-Trump supporters throughout the fake primaries. Do you remember when they used to accuse Donald Trump of essentially committing a genocide for profit by pushing vaccines to market? Does Donald Trump sound like he's the one on the side of the vaccine manufacturers and the vaccine agenda? He's also, by the way, the guy who said they were going to remove any federal funding from schools and universities that put in place mask mandates or vaccine mandates. And just on that policy alone, we would see the end of the childhood vaccine schedule. And certainly if they need the federal money. Now, who knows how this is going to shake out in the future? We've talked many times about how once that federal money goes away and the federal control systems and mechanisms go away or are removed from government, maybe they're replaced by philanthropist spending, global regime spending, no matter how the mechanisms work outside of government, this, directed by the states. But for his part, that's a good way to end the childhood vaccine schedule, because the enforcement mechanism for children being kept on the vaccine schedule is their ability to go to school. And of course, the threats about the diseases they might catch if they don't get plugged with 80 vaccines or whatever ridiculous number it is now. So hopefully in September, we'll have some better understanding of this. Is it going to be linked to the vaccines? Is it going to be linked to something else that ran concurrent with vaccines? I mean, I think most people by this point are pretty well convinced it's the vaccines. That used to be one of the things back when I was not a science denier. I definitely believed, well, you have to have vaccines because that's what gives us herd immunity. And there's no way that vaccines cause autism because the studies say that's not true. And then you realize that most of that science is bullshit and all of these companies are just utterly corrupt and they have no qualms about directly poisoning people at every opportunity, from our food to the things they tell us are going to save our lives from diseases that they've probably also created. So, hey, I don't make the rules. This is not the world I wanted to live in or believe in, but just happens to be where we are now. This is CNN from today. Trump's draft budget eviscerates weather and climate tracking research. And I know what you're thinking. Oh no, now we are all going to be burned alive. We are going to be attacked relentlessly by the sun, and now the science will be unable to save us. The Trump administration plans to eliminate the research arm of National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, close all weather and climate labs, and eviscerate its budget along with several other NOAA offices, according to internal documents obtained by CNN. And this is just yet another one of the things that there has been an ongoing freak out over, including by Rachel Maddow. They're concerned about the weather balloons. They're concerned about all of it. What we need to do is measure the weather all the time, or else when the sun attacks, it will kill us. The move would devastate weather and climate research, even as weather is becoming more erratic and extreme. And even as people are finding out that actually they do manipulate the weather. I don't know if you guys saw that clip from a couple of weeks ago. A representative, maybe a CEO from a weather modification company, was singing the praises of weather modification before some aspect of the Florida legislature. It was incredible, went on for 6 minutes, making the case that actually this is really good for agriculture. We need to be able to create this rain. It's very directed. There's no downside. The studies say there's no downside. It could cripple the U.S. industries, including agriculture, that depend on free, accurate weather and climate data and expert analysis. It would also halt research on deadly weather, including severe storms and tornadoes. A source familiar with the plan told CNN that while the draft budget for fiscal year 2026 will have to be approved by Congress, it is also being distributed to the agency now as guidance on how to slash its current operating budget for the agency, which means the cuts could be implemented this year. Horrifying. We're not going to know anything about the weather anymore, except if they're actually just creating the weather. And then we would still know everything about it. And we would see the prediction of weather and the tracking of weather only as a narrative psyop to convince us that there is no system of control. Love it. Love it. One more, and then we will be on our way out of here for the week. Where did my NASA article go? You know, we got to do some space business. I feel like we always get some nice space business on Fridays. This is from the Daily Beast. Trump admin to slice NASA in half and cancel new telescopes. And I don't know if this is supposed to be extra dramatic or something, but it just says black hole for some reason. So long, space travel. The White House plans to terminate billions of dollars worth of ongoing and future National Aeronautics and Space Administration missions, effectively cutting the world-renowned scientific agency in half. President Donald Trump's most recent budget proposal to Congress proposes major reductions that would cut NASA's Science Mission Directorate from $7.3 billion to $3.9 billion. The Washington Post reported Friday. The SMD is responsible for sponsoring research in several fields: earth science, heliophysics, astrophysics, planetary science, and biological and physical sciences. The astrophysics budget would drop from $1.5 billion to $487 million. The planetary science budget would plunge from $2.7 billion to $1.9 billion. No telescope other than the extant Hubble and Webb telescopes will be funded, including the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope. And I don't think that's a Roman telescope created by Nancy Grace of Headline News. I think Nancy Grace Roman has to be kind of one cohesive thing. And there are probably some spacemen in the audience getting really offended. You don't know about the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, but you're going to say it's not important? Yes. A groundbreaking instrument in the works that would study distant galaxies and faraway planets. Well, here's the thing. Are there distant galaxies and faraway planets? You'd have a hard time convincing me of that. I guess it's possible. I'm not suggesting I know, but you can't tell me that you're looking at distant galaxies and faraway planets based on your unprovable theories about cosmology and the nature of the universe. I'm just not going to buy that. And because I don't buy that, I'm then not going to want to say, yes, you should have billions of dollars to create a groundbreaking instrument that will tell us about the things that you may well have made up. Not all hope is lost, however, as the budget draft is only a first step in the process in which Trump sends Congress a 2026 fiscal year budget request. Congress, which has the power of the purse, could still rescue NASA. The Daily Beast has reached out to the Trump administration for comment. So Congress is going to save the spacemen from Donald Trump, even while Elon Musk, who is like the chief spaceman at this point, is routinely portrayed to us as Donald Trump's best friend ever. And he has SpaceX. And then we hear about Jeff Bezos. They're sending the Desperate Housewives to space. We went over that last week. NASA is the only place where we can save the spacemen. NASA has the relationship with all the universities. NASA tells all the universities what the science is suggesting. And then the universities, of course, give it their stamp of approval. Yes, our academics understand that NASA is correct. We looked through the telescope at the distant galaxies, and we did the mathematical equations. We did the very certain physics, this theoretical physics, on all of the science that NASA has delivered. And we can suggest 100% that the spacemen are correct. Well, if that's the case, let them innovate us into the beautiful new future, and we will just have to take SpaceX and Blue Origin's word for it as they show us all of their gallivanting around the universe. I guess that's going to have to be good enough. Giving the chat one last look before we get on out of here. I hope that you all had a wonderful week, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I see Cam Cooksey in the chat talking about Liberty Den. Enjoy that. Watch Liberty Den on Badlands tonight. And I will be on Devolution Power Hour tomorrow evening. As for this show, I will see you Monday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
you know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
You want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this?
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range. Hey guys, just wanted to pop on for one last second to do one of these Rumble ads that I forgot to do. This is for 1775 Coffee, Rumble's own proprietary brand. So we talked about supporting free speech with Rumble. Here's another way to do it. 1775 Coffee, single origin, small farm, handpicked, specialty grade coffee that stands for quality, free speech, and calling out BS when it matters. Forget stale, mass-produced beans, roasted just enough to hide the flaws. Dark roast hits like a Trump tariff. Medium roast keeps it bold without the bitterness. And Vitality Mushroom Blend, real energy and lasting focus, no synthetic garbage. For K-Cup pods, whole bean, or fresh ground coffee, go to 1775coffee.com. Use code STUDIO for 15% off and start your morning with coffee that stands for something. And for every dollar spent, you get an entry to win a Cybertruck and $30,000 in cash. So I hope that worked. Bye for a second time, and I'll see you on Monday.